Yo, what's poppin', bagel bros, and welcome back to another Patreon rant. If you want one of these, hit the link down in the description, pass me $5 or $10. Today's rant comes from Badoofus, and he wants me to talk about the disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya. The reason why I'm not reading out the actual rant request in full is because I don't feel like it. Unfortunately, you hit me at a bad time. Because I recorded a 40-minute version of this rant, only to realize that my mic fucking broke about 10 minutes in, and most of it is forfeit. And I don't want to try and reconnect this rant to that one and preserve what I can and try and stitch them together. I want it to just be one continuous train of thought, and so I'm just kind of giving up that version of the rant to the ether. So unfortunately, you're not getting the version of the rant where I'm super passionate and getting all my thoughts out about the film for the first time and this huge just string of consciousness as I'm super, just filled with energy. You're getting the version of me that just wasted 40 minutes of his life talking about this movie only for no one to hear it. It's kind of sad. But you are going to get a play-by-play of all my main points about this movie. My core argument being that this movie is a 10 out of 10. This is the one and only rant where someone has forced me to watch a piece of media or listen to an album where I have come away giving it the max score. And I want to first ease you into this with realizing how rare that is for me, because before this, the last 10 out of 10 I gave was Dragon Maid S last year in spring or summer. So I can go well over a year without giving something a 10 out of 10. And granted, I don't watch anime all the time. I don't consume media all the time. I guess if we're talking about media in general, there are some YouTube videos I watched that I would give a 10 out of 10. But for anime, it's very rare for that to happen. And even on YouTube, it's pretty rare to happen. And so, granted, I also have been watching Dandadan lately, and when I finish that, I'm sure it'll be a 10 out of 10. That'll probably also be the max score, but still, this is the only 10 in anime that I will give all year. So this is a very rare occurrence for me. This is probably my fourth favorite piece of media ever. I was talking about YouTube videos I'd give a 10 out of 10, at the very least for YouTube standards. This clears all of them. Normally, whenever I finish a piece of media, I'm typically, either indecisive about what the score should be, especially when it's, reaching that 10 out of 10 threshold. And when I finished this, I did have that familiar feeling of uncertainty. But then I decided I think it's a 10. And when I posted it in my Discord server, I just saw this movie and it's a 10 out of 10, I felt sure of it. I was like, No, I'm right. This is a 10. This deserves the big ol' 1-0, the max score. I am not backing down from this position without good reason. And god damn it, there's so many good reasons to say it is the max score. So without further ado, let's just actually get into this. Are you seeing why I went on about this movie for 40 minutes last time? I'm gonna try and not do that, because I want to get these out before midnight. I don't want to go into the new year with unfinished rants. So the first thing to know about this movie is that it looks gorgeous. It looks stunningly beautiful. It is extremely well directed through and through. And Kyoto Animations, as always, there's a reason why they got the animation in their goddamn name. They animate like no one else does. It is always silky smooth. It feels cinematic. It feels movie quality. They don't always make anime movies like they did back in the day, and goddammit, Kyoto Animations is bringing the quality. But to name a specific directorial quirk that is probably my favorite in the movie, early on in the movie, right, we've got the more slice-of-life bits with Kion and all his friends palling around, Haruhi's planning a Christmas party, and it uses a very warm, vibrant color palette. Lots of oranges, lots of ambers, but then when we get to the part of the movie where Haruhi makes, the title and disappears, we get more gray and cold color palettes. And another genius decision. I mean, first of all, the lights in the classroom are depicted as almost always being off. It's always, that typical cloudy winter day where it's people always imagine Christmas time as being white and snowing, in fiction anyway, but then you actually live it and it's always kind of just gray and depressing outside, and so you stay inside the entire day instead of having a snowball fight. It's that kind of weather. It's the real life Christmas season. And because of that, it feels very cold and distant and gloomy. And furthermore, there's a cold going around that's making people stay home from school, and Taniguchi is in a mask all the time. And so the classroom over time is slowly getting more and more abandoned feeling. And it gives, the part of the movie where Haruhi is gone, this sense that everyone's disappearing, that there's just this sense of isolation all around. It is truly a genius move, and I'm not sure if that's in the novel or not, but when you actually see the classroom emptying out, it hits so hard. So that's about it for the visual aspect. I mean, I could, go through individual shots if I went back through the movie a second time, but for now, there are so many more things to get to. I'm not kidding. I'm not letting it get 40 minutes long. I need to be inside editing this and uploading it. So the next thing I want to talk about is how the concept of this movie is simply the most engaging thing on Earth. It is one of the best scenarios to have in a movie. The idea is that Kion is sent to an alternate timeline, kind of. And also, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to refrain from mentioning spoilers at the beginning, but then at a certain point I'm going to say spoilers begin now, and then we're just going to delve right in, because a lot of the stuff I really like about this movie is spoiler heavy, and I can't stop myself from talking about it. But for the non-spoiler section, this stuff is basic concept of the movie, so I don't really care as much, but if you do really want to just not know anything, because admittedly it is best to go into it knowing as little as possible, but this isn't huge major spoilers stuff or anything. So if you want to go in knowing nothing, I mean, it's a little late for that, but might as well go right now, although you probably would have stopped listening a while ago if that was the case. But anyway, the conceit of this movie is that Kion is sent to an alternate timeline, kind of. There's a specific explanation later on that I won't get into for now, but in short, things are different, and it sort of puts the entire concept of the series on its head, where general spoilers for Haruhi anime ahead, the idea of the series is that it starts off as a typical slice of life, but the reveal is that different characters in the series are time travelers, espers, aliens, and Haruhi herself is God. She created the world 3 years ago, and she wants these supernatural things to be real, and so she made them real because she is God. But they can't let her know she's God, and so Koizumi, Nagato, and Mikuru are here to make sure that she stays calm, doesn't accidentally destroy the world, and make sure that she doesn't figure out that she's God. And the more meta and parodical element of the series is that the characters are pretending to be moe anime tropes. Koizumi is the most blatant faker of the three, and admittedly Nagato isn't really faking. She is literally constructed to not feel emotions, but there's a different explanation behind her having a deadpan personality. And then Mikuru, once again, she isn't necessarily faking her personality per se, although she does grow up to have a different one, but she is also hiding the truth about herself. It's these moe characters that also have something deeper to them, but the deeper elements are also, twisting and turning of tropes. And it's basically all of these elements elements are colliding to create this just insane maelstrom of ideas, and the show gets really abstract and just ridiculous with its concepts. And that's part of the fun of the series, is seeing how far it can go with its stupid fucking premise. But here, it's turned on its head, where, instead of the everyday life being turned into supernatural shenanigans, it's the opposite. Supernatural shenanigans are becoming normal. And to Kion, this is perturbing. This is disturbing, because he is used to things the way that they are. And the show really sells just how much this disturbs Kion, where for no reason at all that he knows of at this stage of the movie, everyone remembers a different world than he does. It really sells that to him, this is a horrifying scenario to be in. And he just spends, the first hour of him being in the scenario, slowly coming to terms with it and trying to, figure out why he's here and what exactly is different. And it really, it sells that scenario as interesting, both through the directing, the characterization, but also because it just is interesting. And furthermore, we get to see all the different characters act differently than what they usually would. Well, only one of their personalities is different, and that is a huge thing. That is Chekhov's gun done genius style, which we will get to. But because the characters are in a different scenario, they're all ordinary high schoolers as opposed to all these, wacky career paths of being aliens and time travelers, because they're at a different stage in life, and so they do have differences accordingly. And furthermore, because Kion is in this scenario, he's acting towards them differently than he would otherwise, where he sort of foils his entire, dynamic with Mikuru, because he inadvertently sexually harasses her. He's trying to, at this point he's desperate, right? He's like, Mikuru, hey, do you remember anything about this? And at some point he's like, come on, verify that you're the real Mikuru. You have this star-shaped mole on your tit. You should show me that. And obviously, she then punches him in the face, and her friend then threatens to do so even harder if he fucks with them again. So he is now, before saying something like that to Mikuru would, it'd be out of pocket, but they have an established dynamic where that wouldn't be the worst thing ever. But here, it's sexual harassment. He has the excuse of being in a really bad headspace at this point and just desperately clawing for things and not really thinking it through. But nonetheless, he has now ruined that dynamic. And every time they so much as meet eyes, he can barely meet her in the eyes. They just there's this one scene where he's walking through the hall, sees Mikuru, and there's just awkward silence. And then her friend is like, what the fuck? You're not supposed to be near her. Just, it's such an interesting dynamic, right? And Koizumi and Haruhi don't appear for a while. And so at the beginning, he just thinks they've been spirited away pretty much. But Nagato is a different person. Haruhi and Koizumi, slight spoiler, when they do appear, they have the same personalities, even if certain things about their past are different. And even if the dynamic differs slightly because of that, fundamentally they're the same person. But Nagato is completely different. She is just normally she is a deadpan robotic girl, but in this version of the story, she's shy, she's demure, she's a bookworm still, but, she doesn't really know how to open up to people, and she has, an actual, she has emotions within her that she displays, whereas before, in the real timeline, she's a robot who is beginning to feel things, but still barely does so. Basically, Rei Ayanami from Evangelion, which, considering that she's an alien, who isn't supposed to feel emotions, is she is literally Rei Ayanami. But yeah, God, there's so much to talk about, and I don't even know the order to get into it in. What the fuck? There's something I need to remember to mention. Something I like about this movie's premise is that it's, once again, it flips the concept of the series on its head. So usually Haruhi is the one saying, like, I want to meet aliens, I want to meet time travelers, I want to do this. Like, she's a crazy person, according to everyone else around her. But in this movie, it's Kion who is the crazy person, and he's the one explaining to Haruhi that, hey, aliens and all this shit are real, and in another, great moment, she actually believes him. Although I'm getting ahead of myself, because I also wanted to talk more about Kion's dynamic with Nagato, because he and Nagato are the main characters of this movie, essentially. They are the two with arcs, and each of their arcs is powerful. Nagato's even more so than Kion's, I think. Her arc is the reason why I gave this movie a 10. Without that, it would have been more of a toss-up. But with that, I think her arc is so geniusly executed that it, I wouldn't say carries the movie because it fires on all cylinders all the time, but it is so good. And where this begins, right? It's setting her arc up in the background throughout the entire movie in a way that is genius. It is so good. But, her dynamic with Kion, she, quickly falls in love with him, where Kion, he goes to the literary club, turns into the SOS Brigade in his real timeline, but he goes to what is currently the literary club, and Nagato is the only person there, and he asks her if she's an alien, and, she says no, obviously, but then he gets so, panicked about this, and at this point, it's the end of the day, he's at the end of his rope, he's tired of this, and he ends up, grabbing her by the shoulders, shaking her, come on, we're supposed to know each other, eventually, pins her against a wall, and to Yuki, this is the most terrifying thing that's happened to her in ages. She's, scared out of her mind, and Kion realizes this, backs away, and is oh, what the fuck am I doing? I'm letting myself get too caught up in this. But I think being pinned against the wall kind of set something off in Yuki, because she is very quickly in love with him afterwards, because in this timeline she's not used to being regarded. Granted, she wasn't used to it in her real timeline either, but she's not used to being approached or talked to. She's the only one in this club, and she's a more feeling, more shy version of Yuki, a more feeling one, someone who's nervous to talk to people, nervous to be looked at too much. And so she musters up all of her courage, because she, Kion, she's talking, or he's talking to her like she's special, like she means something to him. And even though he's a weirdo, that's still more than nothing. And to Yuki, being talked to at all is enough to be oh my god, I'm not used to this. Help, I'm head over heels for you. And it is one of the most pure and, wholesome romances I've seen in ages. I love it. I love it so much. I was genuinely rooting for Yuki the entire movie. And even if it isn't a romance movie per se, and even though oh god, well, I'm not going to spoil that. But it is just such a touching character dynamic. Their dynamic is I can't get enough of it. I love the way they interact with each other. And it makes Yuki in this timeline, at first, a more interesting character than the Yuki in the real timeline, which makes it, made me kind of upset when he goes back to the real timeline eventually. But we're not at that point yet. And the movie does something so fucking genius! So, this is the part of the review where I'm gonna tell you, alright, I'm get into spoilers. We're getting into late second act, early third act stuff here. So, if you wanna, have the big reveals not spoiled for you, now's your time to leave. And also, I think it's very telling that we're only about halfway through this thing, and this is the short version of the rant. So, eventually Kion meets up with Haruhi and Koizumi. He hears that they're in another school, right? So there's an entire classroom gone in the current reality that differs from the old one. And those people all got relocated to this new school. And Haruhi and Koizumi are in that school. And he eventually, in this very triumphant scene, meets up with them. And what I love is that Haruhi and Kion's dynamic in this, current reality is the closest it is to the one in the old reality, where even though their memories don't line up exactly, nonetheless, they interact with each other in a very similar way. And Haruhi believes Kion when he says that, hey, I'm from an alternate reality, and you're God in that reality, and there's, aliens and time travelers. She actually believes him, even though in, the old reality, he had tried to tell her all this, but she had just, brushed it off like, there's no way that's real. This Haruhi is like, that Haruhi's a fucking idiot. Bro, that's so fun because Haruhi has main character syndrome, and the joke is that she is literally the main character despite having main character syndrome, but can't know that she's the main character, which is hilarious to think about. But he appeals to her main character syndrome, and I'm sure that, with how well they get along in their brief interactions, I'm sure that this Haruhi would have fallen in love with Kion just like the current one in the old reality already has. And in this reality, Koizumi is actually in love with Haruhi, which he is not in the old one, because he is a normal high school boy going through all those normal high school boy emotions and hormones and shit, and he doesn't have this, entire full-time job revolving around her in the same way that the current Koizumi does. And so Koizumi is like, he notices immediately, he sees that Haruhi does naturally just click with Kion so well, no matter which timeline it is. Now, eventually, we get to a point where the SOS Brigade is reunited in the club room, which is actually the key to unlocking the alternate timeline Yuki Nagato's message to leave behind for Kion in the current timeline. And this is where the plot gets a little confusing to just dump on you. It makes sense when you watch the movie. It's a little convoluted, but it does all together, it clicks. It clicks. But it might get a little confusing to talk about, but basically, alt timeline Yuki Nagato, or I guess alt timeline meaning the old timeline that Kion was in before this current one, is like, hey, here's... I fucking love how this is shown. It's like a Windows BIOS that says, press enter to, get on the path to resetting the timeline. Press any other key to stay in this one. You only have one chance at it. This comes back way later, but God, I don't even know how to begin getting into it. But after this, in terms of, just normal plot, we go back, or I guess back in time to the old timeline, to Bamboo Leaf Rhapsody, where, there's some, once again, Haruhi goes ridiculous with its logic. He's watching another version of himself, who was already time traveling, meet, future Mikaru, and, help out the old Haruhi, and, it's kind of insane to think about, and it gets even more insane later on. Admittedly, this is the weakest part of the movie, just because it's the least engrossing emotionally. It is more of just, here's how we're, mechanically resolving the timeline, but it's still... it's a good old fun Haruhi shenanigans. I'd still give this stretch of the movie an 8 out of 10, and it immediately pivots into the most peak part of the movie, which is where we get to all the big emotional payoffs. So I'm just gonna tackle these emotional payoffs one at a time with Kion's arc and then Nagato's, and then do some parting thoughts. So, Kion's arc is realizing that he does actually have fun with Haruhi, where his role in the series is to say, fuck you, Haruhi, fuck you and your plans and your schemes, I hate you. He's the dissenter. He's the one who's always saying, not this again, right? But throughout the movie, he has been desperately trying to get back into his timeline. And he even says, imagine someone was in hell, and for no reason at all, was suddenly transported to heaven. But, because it was for no reason, and not of their own volition, and they don't understand why they've been sent, they want to go back to hell. But that answer doesn't quite satisfy him. He comes to a much better answer in the climax of the movie, where he has a monologue with himself that is shown in very abstract terms of literally like Kion's reflection of himself, talking to him and being like, it was fun, wasn't it? Because at the end of the day, that is why Kion wants to go back to Haruhi. He wants to have fun with her. And this is a reversal of the main message of the first novel. The first novel was about Haruhi learning that she doesn't need the supernatural to have fun, because she can't learn about its existence once again. And the fact that it doesn't exist gets her to hate the world so much that she nearly destroys it in her rage, unintentionally but still does. She loses faith in the world itself. But Kion teaches her, through kissing her, that it's interpersonal relationships that matter. The world isn't fun because there's all sorts of crazy alien shit. It's fun because people are fun. And that's the message of the first novel. And it's a great message. I think the themes of the first Haruhi novel are genius. Thematically, it is one of my favorite pieces of fiction. But here, it's Kion coming to that same realization, but the tides are flipped. The tables have turned, where Kion always talks about how he doesn't want to be in this mess with Haruhi and the gang. He wants to just go back to his ordinary life. But here he realizes that the timeline where Haruhi and everyone are in this ridiculous scenario where Haruhi is God, he is really, he loves those people, and he doesn't want these alternate timeline versions. He wants the versions that he's spent months of his life with, that he wouldn't trade anything for, where no matter how much he says that he hates Haruhi and is sick of her shit, he really isn't. And to make this message really hit home, and something that I really appreciate from this movie, Haruhi is really nice in this movie for the most part. There's a bit of her forcibly making Asahina change at the beginning, but for the most part she is really toned down in terms of her general meanness. And I think that is a really good decision, because you want to make the audience care about going back to that timeline. And if Haruhi is as much of an asshole as she is in some of the other novels, it would really mess with that. This is Haruhi at her most conventionally likable, and for this movie and what it's attempting to accomplish, that is definitely for the best. But that wouldn't put it at a 10 per se. Maybe not. Maybe it would be, but this next part is where I knew the movie was a 10. Even with the brief indecision at the end of, posting that it was a 10, still, this is what solidified it in my mind and made me want to post, this is the best fucking movie I've ever seen, and it's a 10 out of 10. So, Yuki Nagato is the best character in Haruhi and on my favorite characters list, because of what happens next. So, in the first Haruhi novel, it's revealed, the first character to be revealed to be supernatural is Yuki Nagato. She's revealed to be an interface, made by the, over hive mind thing that's made of pure data, and she is an interface to, interact with the world and with Haruhi, because beings made of pure data can't do that. The actual explanation is super esoteric and super what the fuck, and that is the joke. But this movie makes you take it seriously, because Nagato is made by, the data overmind, right? But that also means that she was created in this way. She was created to be this dull girl who doesn't feel emotions, and her deviating from that is treated as aberrations from her code. She is meant to be the robot with no emotions who only acts logically, and to have emotions gets in the way of that. And what I realized, and what soon after Kion realized, that made me think that this movie was genius, is that Yuki Nagato okay, so it's revealed, I sort of skipped this part actually. It's revealed that Yuki Nagato is the one who set up this aberration in the timeline, where she, her unfeeling self, because she is having these aberrations in her code. I'm using that word a lot, aberration. These errors in her code that are making her feel emotions, She went through the entire Endless Eight. She was the one who, lived each day and remembered each day. She is the one who, she's having to solve all these problems, right? Her powers. And she is gradually getting tired of it, but she doesn't let it out at all. She still stays her old, deadpan self, even though on the inside, she is getting more and more frustrated with her circumstances. And so she decides to, in what is a deviation from her code and what she's supposed to do, change the timeline. But she doesn't feel entirely confident in her decision. And she decides to entrust the final choice to Kion. She decides to give him the choice to either stay in the safe timeline or go back to the chaotic one. And he obviously chooses to go back to the more chaotic one, where Haruhi is God and everyone is weird as shit. And, it's the powerful resolution to his arc, which is why he needs to be given the choice. But Yuki giving that choice is powerful in and of itself, because her arc is one about, basically she creates this timeline where she, everyone else is the same, right? Everyone else has the same personality, but she alone has a different personality entirely. And it's one of the most genius pieces of Chekhov's gun that I have seen in ages. It is literally like one of the most genius twists I have seen ever, because I realized it and was like, wait, what the fuck? This is Yuki's ideal self. Yuki wants to be human. And this makes Yuki fascinating as a character, because like I said, the version of Yuki in this alternate timeline is more interesting than the perpetually deadpan Yuki. And when we missed that time, or rather, got out of that timeline, I kind of missed her, and I also, things weren't fully resolved with that version of Yuki. And that is deliberate, because we're resolving them with the current Yuki. And at first that kind of tore me up a little and was like, hold on, I want to see more of this Yuki. I want to see that version of her, get some resolution with Kion leaving. But it's because they're going to resolve it at the end of the movie with the real Yuki. And what makes her the most interesting character in the series to me is that it can make the more interesting version of her and then make the old version more interesting than that new version by making it so that she is someone who is yearning for emotion. She does not want to be the empty version of herself that she is. There is something deeply tragic about Yuki in this movie, and Kion recognizes this. And in the final conversation between him and Yuki, Yuki's like, I don't think I'm long for this world. I think the data overmind, they're probably gonna get me. They're probably gonna be like, hey, this is too big of a fuck up. You've gone too far. Because in this, new timeline she created, the data overmind doesn't even exist. It's literally just our world. And, after erasing them in the old timeline, they're obviously going to be like, what the fuck? And so Yuki Nagato predicts that she's probably going to disappear. And Kion's like, bitch, if you disappear, I'ma go looking for ya. Me, Haruhi, everyone, we're all gonna go and find you. Because god damn it, we care about you. And it is just such a powerful moment. I legitimately teared up around this point, because after the tragedy of Yuki's character sinks in, after Kion realizes just how deeply painful of an existence that is, he does his part to cheer her up and reassure her that, hey, no matter what happens, we're here for you. And the post-credits scene shows Yuki Nagato in the library. She's reading, and she sees a couple of kids playing. And it cuts back to her, and she raises her book over her mouth. And it's implied that she is smiling behind those pages, that she has learned to feel more emotion than she previously thought possible, where, even though she is still her deadpan self, she's slowly becoming human, and she's working towards becoming her ideal self. This is what I mean when I say that she's the better version of Rei Ayanami, because this was literally Rei's arc, but I thought that it was kind of mishandled in that series where it was, it was more about gaining autonomy from Gendo Ikari, and it just kind of felt rushed in a way where the other leads all felt more interesting than her, but this Yuki Nagato literally gives me something, one of the things I cited in not giving Eva a 10, this movie does. That's one of the best arguments I can give as to why it is a 10. That's God tier. I can't believe this rant is as long as it is even after doing the prior 40-minute version. The audio better not be busted, but there is one last thing I want to talk about, which is the biggest flaw in this movie. And also my defense of it anyway. So, because reasons, I've sort of skimped out on specific plot details in order to not get too recappy and too caught up on them, but in short, Asakura at one point stabs and murders Kion. Then an alternate timeline version of Kion says, look man, that had to happen, I'm sorry about it, and then he goes on to, fix the timeline. So there is a deliberate loose end in the movie, where this Kion doesn't really know exactly how the timeline fixed itself, and why, Ryoko is stabbing him when she should be the new version of her. It's really weird and out of nowhere, and it doesn't really fit with anything else in the movie. And taken by its own merits, I do think that it makes the movie just a little worse for having this twist. But I would like to show you the flip side of the coin, where Haruhi is an insane series. Its logic is ridiculous. It is one of the few series where something like this could even happen. And in being ballsy enough to have ridiculous twists like that, even if it doesn't always work out 100%, the fact that it is able to do that and make it work out in the end anyway, that's one of the most powerful things I can say about the series. In short, I guess this entire rant has been in very long, but in short, this is my favorite movie. This is the best movie ever. It's so good. Yeah, thanks for making me watch it, and Happy New Year's. That's about it. See ya.